the introduction going.
Okay.
All right. Welcome, everyone. We have today joining us this week's presenter, Mr. Michael Hampton. Thank you for joining us, Michael. Mr. Hampton is currently an entertainment consultant, music producer, and executive producer. He is also a team member of the Third Coast Recording Company in Grand Haven, Minnesota?
Michigan.
Thank you. Yeah. Michigan. I forgot my Minnesota's in Michigan. And became a voting member of the Grammys in 2010. In addition to his career in the entertainment industry, he successfully built an investment practice as a vice president of investments with Raymond James and Associates, an investment banking firm headquartered at 880 Carolyn Parkway, St. Petersburg, Florida. He was responsible for the management of client investment portfolios and 401k consulting for the Grand Rapids, Michigan office. Mr. Hampton began his career in the securities industry in 1979 as a financial consultant with Fitton, Cunningham, and Lausanne. He joined Thompson McKinnon Securities in 1980 in the Morristown, New Jersey office as a financial consultant, and in 1984, he became the branch manager. In 1985, he transferred to the Indianapolis, Indiana office as his manager, and in 1989, Thompson McKinnon Securities was purchased by Prudential Securities, for whom he continued to manage the Indianapolis office until 1991. He moved to the Grand Rapids, Michigan office in 1991 as the branch office manager and a financial advisor, where he continued to serve the community and Prudential until 2022. He joined Raymond James and Associates in 2002 as a vice president of investments until 2015, when Mr. Hampton sold his investment practice to his partners at Raymond James and Associates. Mr. Hampton has provided outstanding leadership in his investment career. He successfully built 3 branch offices in the investment businesses, and prior to the securities industry, Mr. Hampton was president of Skywheel Productions and director of tour management, A&R, and audio engineering for Jeff Key Productions in New Jersey. He has been responsible as part of the management and career development team for highly successful recording artists. Mr. Hampton is also a veteran of the United States Navy, in which he served as an electronics intelligence analyst. By the way, thank you for serving our country, Mr. Hampton.
I would hope that you wouldn't have read all that. It's, it's just embarrassing to hear it read.
Well, it's definitely good to learn. I'm happy to know it now. I think that it's important for people who are going to listen to you to know who's speaking as it relates to what we're going to talk about. This week's topic, the divine economy. The world economy of Bahá'u'lláh transcends in scope and purpose the belated response to the risk of calamity made by economists and statesmen under the pressure of events in recent years. His principles are established upon organic laws of human evolution. They interpret the modern problem not as a temporary maladjustment of industry and trade, the effects of an industrial revolution that we know, but as a movement in humanity itself. They make the necessary connection between the spiritual and practical affairs of men, which alone can breathe the breath of life into any social mechanism. And with that said, Mr. Hampton, I think we can trust, having heard a little about you, that you've got something to say about this with some credibility. So please, we look forward to hear.
Well, if we're going to talk about the concept of a divine economy, sometimes we need to just make a definition. And I keep things fairly simple. I'm not real academic. And just to add to that resume bio that you read, I've been running businesses since I was 12 years old. And I entered the investment business without a master's degree, We were running very large businesses in the entertainment industry in New Jersey, New York. And I was recruited into the investment business. And I had long hair, and actually had hair at the time, very long hair, and I still had a beard, and didn't own a suit. And the idea of business for me has always been defined somewhat different than what you would see in terms of an academic discussion. Economics to me is a system of providence, and use a capital P. And the reason that it's that way, and also in old dictionaries, there is that definition that economics and economy are systems of providence. If we think about who we are as human beings, we are spiritual beings already existing in another world beyond time and space, and yet we don't know it. Just as a child in its mother's womb is already in our world, we're already in the next world. So I think the French philosopher said that Descartes says that we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And so that definition of economics works very well for the concept of a system of providence. Economics is really about us as human beings serving one another. And so if we're going to have a discussion around that, I'd like to continue having it as a system of providence. I have a brother that's a PhD in economics, professor at a retired professor at Nebraska, and we've had these long discussions. And he doesn't mind me keeping it simple for my own purposes. Well, if we're going to talk about this concept, it refers back to my childhood. I grew up with parents. My father was an Assembly of God minister, which is an evangelical type church. And so we read the Bible all the time. So I like referring to the Bible, and there's promises in the Bible about the kingdom of heaven on earth. How would we get there? How would a divine economy be part of the kingdom of heaven on earth? It's probable that we're not going to have the kingdom of heaven on earth without divine intervention. And so that comes from a Baha'i perspective, as well as any other religious perspective, from a voice, a messenger that is brought to us authoritatively from God. But to get us there, a system of providence, service to others through our work, is the basics of it. Now, for those of you that are Baha'is or familiar with the Baha'i faith, you know there's some real basic principles that are kind of the framework that exist for all of humanity to follow, and certainly to guide Baha'is. And of course, we believe in the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, the oneness of humanity. We believe that religion has come to us progressively. We believe in the concept of the elimination of prejudices, the elimination of racism, the harmony between science and religion, and that religion without science becomes an environment of superstition, and science without religion is a misguided, possibly a misguided situation that has no ethical guidance for it, and can be very dangerous. Individual investigation of truth, universal compulsory education, universal language, world commonwealth, equality of women and men, and spiritual solutions to economic problems. Okay, so I've taken you all through that framework. I'm going to speak fairly quickly, but I'm going to take you back to the concept of business and the investment world. Now, I don't know, I'm generally a speaker in front of an audience, but here we are. And typically I'm going to ask a question. How many of you have made a good business deal with a dishonest person? I hear somebody laugh. It doesn't seem like it, right? I mean, you may think you've made a good business deal, but the truth of the matter is that if they're truly dishonest, you're not making a good business deal. So the world we know that helps us go through that process in an economic or business situation has regulations. And those regulations oftentimes are very one-sided. They're very politically driven. They're very oriented towards wealth, etc. And so, we look at this and say, thinking about the concept of business as a system of providence may be thinking naive, but just that first response, have you ever made a good business deal with a dishonest person? So there are obstacles to doing this. And those challenges are prejudices, integrity, racism, nationalism, the inequality of women and men, the extremes of wealth and poverty, poor education, waste of natural resources, pollution, materialism, justice, fairness, currency, health, systems of evaluation of economics, security, selfish interests, world population, Earth's carrying capacity, crowded cities, food supply, transportation, and trust. From my having been a Baha'i for almost 51 years, I was drawn to the concept of human beings serving human beings. And this is one of those places in which we are able to look at all of the spiritual things that are necessary for us as human beings to move forward and build the kingdom of heaven on earth. I'm trying to get a little more oriented because the sign-on process kind of threw me off. All right. Generally, I'm going to talk about this subject from a standpoint of how do we proceed? How do we do this? And I've given you those 11 principles. I'm going to get, and we talked about honesty. The founder of the Baha'i Faith says that honesty and trustworthiness are the foundations of our economy. And as the fact that our honesty and trustworthiness are situations in which we know that eventually we're not going to be able to make a good business deal if somebody's dishonest. The things that are of risk for us besides the integrity issues come back to a thing where we each have to evaluate a relationship. And I've always said that there's only two things that have any value in a socioeconomic system. One is human knowledge, and the other is human opinion. And of course, I'm sharing my opinion today, and all of you are being very polite and quiet. So think about it this way. If you want to build something, eventually you've got to have the knowledge to do so. So if you want to build something, first build human knowledge. And education that's compulsory, according to one of the principles of the Baha'i Faith, is critical. But the next thing is that we need to have the ability to not only build people, building their knowledge, their education, but also listening to them, sharing their opinions. And I'm going to give you one of the risk factors when we don't. There is this thing called currency. And that currency typically is based upon a sovereign state, meaning a country. So the US dollar is our common currency. Before the United States was formed, the various states in various areas in the United States each had their own currencies, much of which was gold and silver. And think about this, human knowledge and human opinion, just as it relates to currency. Currency changes value every second of the day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week against two things. Another currency's value against that currency and or what that currency will buy. And that's based upon all of these systems of economics of supply and demand. So when we start talking about building the kingdom of heaven on earth through the contribution of economics, then we look at understanding, taking human knowledge making sure we've created environments of listening to that knowledge and building within that framework a system of nobility, a system of consultation, a system of values, of valuing the human being. So that's the framework of my talk. And that's really super simple. And I want to know if there's questions so far.
There is. So there is a question about the system of providence. Can you explain, please, for those who are wondering, what is a system of providence?
Okay. Well, providence in this case is referring to a power higher than human beings, higher than the concept of time space. And so we from a religious standpoint believe that that's God. Now, from a definition of what is God, there is a simple definition that is in the Baha'i faith. It's called the unknowable essence. And there's 97 names that describe the attributes of that unknowable essence. And yet they're only there for us to be able to grasp a portion of what that is, that relationship, our creator. So for example, if God is a creator, then creation has had no beginning because God's always created, and will have no end because God's always creating as a creator. So a system of providence is a system that's given to us through the messengers of God in order to guide us. And it started with human beings on the planet developing to a point where they became a family, and then ultimately a tribe, and then ultimately a city-state, and then into nationhood. And we look at this and say, now it's time for humanity to recognize its oneness throughout the world and know that in order for us to continue existing, we've got to find ways to coexist as a world commonwealth. I don't know if that helped or not. But that's the recognition that we are spiritual and that the providence is referencing God. And it's a system in which religion is applied on a very practical day-to-day basis based upon, we mentioned, honesty and trustworthiness. It's hard to have a good marriage without honesty and trustworthiness, for example. I hope that answers. No other questions? I see it on chat, there may be another one.
So I saw that one question. However, there may be also direct messages that are posed to you, and that's possible. However, if that didn't answer the question, please, whoever is asking, feel free to also message if you have follow-ups to your questions and so forth, and we'll get to them. But there is a question about this concept of trust. So you say that trust is essential between people who enter into business with another. However, what of those that are of the opinion that as long as you trust some system that is in play, that irrespective if you trust a person, you can still engage in that transaction? For example, if they break the law, there's a lawman somewhere that's going to go after them. Or if we say it in that respect, if there is a contract, that there will be some force that will make sure the contract happens.
So it's important for us to have rules and laws, okay? And that's true in case somebody breaks the trust. Think about how costly that is. So we go back to this idea of being able to have trust in somebody to do business, but when we don't, what do? We create laws and we create regulations, and sometimes those are important. But if everybody was honest, how would that affect our economy economically? Meaning the costs. How big would the militaries have to be throughout the world How big would law enforcement have to be throughout the world? Those are just two. How much regulation would be in terms of governments? How big would government have to be in order to regulate if we were essentially honest and trustworthy? And my belief, just the fact that we coexist in a system that we're pretty codependent, meaning that we're, as human beings, we are on this planet dependent upon everybody. That's our oneness. But we have come to a point where there's a lot of distrust, and we have to create big armies, and we have to have lots of expense of regulating ourselves. And it's one of those things where it's one of the most expensive things that we have to regulate ourselves and protect ourselves because of dishonesty. So as we develop the concept of a world civilization, as we develop the concept of our oneness and understanding and religion and harmony, as we begin to develop our ability to eliminate prejudices within our own hearts, as we begin to be able to eliminate racism, as we are able to communicate with a greater education, a universal compulsory education, and we include women and men together in that conversation. Let's go back to my definition of what has value: human knowledge and human opinion. So if we are in a room and there's 9 people in a room and we're only willing to listen to 2, how much have we robbed ourselves of the possibilities of greater information? But if we include everyone, then we're in a position in which we've gained greater wealth just through that knowledge. As an example, if only men in the world were capable of making all the decisions and capable of providing information for everybody's benefit, we've cut ourselves off of 51% of all the knowledge in the world, because women make up 51%. I don't know if that answers it or not, but it's very expensive to be untrustworthy. It's very expensive to have to evaluate every situation and then take it to a court. How big would courts be if 99.9% of all issues were taken care of because of trustworthiness? And it's probably a higher number than that. I don't know if that answers it or not.
That leads to another question. When you speak about this cost factor, assuming that cost no longer is a factor, and just assuming that trust in of itself is of highest priority, if one cannot trust in the system, then what other recourse do you have?
Okay, so remember, I'm a Baha'i, and I come from a standpoint of following the teachings of Bahá'u'lláh, Abdu'l-Baha, and the guidance from Shoghi Effendi, who is the great-grandson of Bahá'u'lláh, etc. And for those of you that have a Baha'i friend, and you may not be a Baha'i, then you will have the opportunity to ask them some of these questions. But the concept of governance was clearly addressed by Bahá'u'lláh. And there is an administrative system that he has laid forth for humanity. And it's been beginning going through its evolution and in terms of the Baha'i faith. So that's a whole very, very long discussion. But one of the key factors of that is that administration process by which it can guide and give direction of governance to the world. Now, we may say, well, that's not civil guidance, but the truth of the matter is that we've come a long ways in terms of coming from humanity being in a tribal state to the ability to communicate worldwide and do business internationally, etc. And we're still working on these laws. I one of the concerns I always had as a young child of thinking about the kingdom of heaven on earth. And we had these discussions where when Christ came, there was some belief among Christians that there was this poof, all of a sudden we would have the kingdom of heaven on earth. And I look at it as a child and I said to myself, and at first I was afraid to confront my father on this. And I said to myself, this just does not make sense. You know, even during the time that Christ walked, there was still the trials and tests of humanity to build things. And he was persecuted for his and crucified for his commentary, his teachings, as was all of the holy messengers of God, as was Bahá'u'lláh. So the question is, in my mind, I always thought that there's not going to be a big poof factor. We're going to have to build this thing based upon the guidance that's coming to us from the holy messenger when under the return of Christ, or the 12th Imam of the reincarnation of Krishna, etc. We believe Baha'u'lláh has fulfilled that. That's Baha'is beliefs. And when people ask the question, well, what are Baha'is doing? If they really are serious, I have a library that just the history of what the Baha'is have done is bigger than an Encyclopedia Britannica, for those of you that are old enough to know what that is. So it fills just one shelf, carries us through the first 100 years, and that's it's a pretty big wide shelf. So I don't know if it answers the question, but we're in a position where we have been given guidance in regards to how to handle our entire lives and on a day-to-day basis, how we have families, how we raise those families, how we educate children, and how we treat one another. And we're given this guidance, and some of it is a reiteration of what the other messengers had talked about prior to Baha'u'lláh coming. Maybe it didn't answer you directly. I hope there's clarification.
It's very valuable. Thank you. The question was answered, and it leads us to this concept then, this trust that's to be formed for a society to then flourish. It's based off of divine factors. It's based off of morals. It's based off of something spiritual from a source that is a God.
Yes.
So the question becomes, with regards to the systems that people have been implementing modern day, you have all the way from cryptocurrency, this concept of blockchain, to have trust, to transfer this idea of this trust in a currency, gold again being older form of currency that again it is trusted, hence people want to use it. And then our money we use now, the United States dollars, the credit that we use, that we base the money on despite all the circumstances against it. There are all of these systems. Baha'is are promised that these faltering systems will continue to, despite every mechanism put in place, continue to falter and collapse. And only in acceptance of a system that is ordained by God will the world know peace. So the question becomes, how do you envision this peace happening?
Out of trial and error, out of pain. And there's historical precedence for the necessity of religion to provide a framework for the survival of humanity on the planet. For those of us that have studied at least a little bit of the Holy Roman Empire, it became holy only after the Roman Empire began to falter and the early Christian teachings began to have an effect in regards to a structure of some sort to maintain some level of civilization. So when we begin looking at all of the Holy Scriptures that have been given to us by Bahá'u'lláh, by Abdul-Baha, by the Bab, and clarifications also in terms of language interpretation from Shoghi Effendi, we're talking about hundreds of volumes of books. So for example, on economics, and I can give this to you. I think I sent it to Jeremiah. I sent it to Jeremiah, and maybe he can give it to the Baha'i community. But I've given some references on economics, and in the Hidden Words, which is one of the books of Bahá'u'lláh, there are dozens of places in there that is guidance, spiritual guidance, but on economics, and so you'll see them. I can share some of that with you if you choose to, but also
yes,
there. Okay, I'll be glad to do so. But I'd like you to think about it this way. If we are in a position in which we have the opportunity to learn from somebody, which is preferable, to learn from somebody who is honest and trustworthy and has the knowledge we're trying to gain, or is dishonesty and ungodly? I go back to my Christian roots. There is a passage in the Bible that says, "The blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of the sinner, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. For his delight will be in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night," etc., etc. We have a lot of passages in Hidden Words that's talking about association, just association, okay? And they're very quick, they're very simple, but it's about hanging out with people who are godly, who are trustworthy, who are people that we can afford to be around. I'll give it to you. This is page 42, number 56. "O my son, the company of the ungodly increaseth sorrow, whilst fellowship with the righteous cleanseth the rust from off the heart. He that seeketh to commune with God, let him betake himself to the companionship of his loved ones. And he that desireth to hearken unto the word of God, let him give ear to the words of his chosen ones." Here's another. "Beware, walk not with the ungodly, and seek not fellowship with him, for such companionship turneth the radiance of the heart into infernal fire." Here's another. "Wouldst thou seek the grace of the Holy Spirit, enter into fellowship with righteous, for he hath drunk the cup of eternal life at the hands of the immortal cupbearer. And even as the true morn doth quicken, illumine the hearts of the dead." Does that help a little bit? I'll give you another one. Let's start with the basics of who we are. Hidden Word says, "O son of spirit, noble, have I created thee. While what yet thou hast debased thyself, rise then into that for which thou was created."
that's beautiful.
All right, so now I'm gonna lay another one on you. Let's see. This is the standard that was spoken of by Abdul-Baha. "I desire distinction for you. The Baha'is must be distinguished from others of humanity. But this distinction must not depend upon wealth. But they should become more affluent than other people. I do not desire for you financial distinction. It is not an ordinary distinction I desire. Not scientific, commercial, industrial distinction. For you, I desire spiritual distinction. That is, you must become eminent and distinguished in morals. In the love of God, you must become distinguished from all else. You must become distinguished for loving humanity, for unity and accord, for love and justice. In brief, you must become distinguished in all the virtues of the human world, for faithfulness and sincerity, for justice and fidelity, for firmness and steadfastness, for philanthropic deeds in service to the human world, for love toward every human being, for unity and accord with all people, for removing prejudices and promoting international peace. Finally, you must become distinguished for heavenly illumination and for acquiring the bestowals of God. I desire this distinction for you. This must be the point of distinction among you. There's another book called Gleanings. And in that, he refers to us as the supreme talisman. And it's fairly lengthy, but maybe if we've got time. That's from Tablets of Bahá'u'lláh, and I knocked off another book. Hold on. Let's just go on. So they're putting up some of the things that I had sent along that you can perhaps print out from your Baha'i Center there and do it. I also put on there some other books that are written by people that we know, and a list of additional suggested references. So I gave references from the Baha'i scriptures and references from people who have written books on it. One that I recently read is called the ECO principle, and eco is a Greek word. And so there's the economy, and then there is the ecosystem, you know, the system of measuring the Earth's system of life support. Arthur Dahl is the one that wrote that book. I would refer you very closely with some of the resolutions that Abdu'l-Baha gave directly in regards to business, one of which is profit sharing. And he talked about profit sharing as a way to eliminate the extremes of wealth and poverty. You'll find that in a book called Foundations of World Unity. Anything else? Any other questions? I'm kind of rambling because it's, you know, it's one of those things where it's easier for me to be able to sit in front of an audience and see your faces, etc. So I think putting those up and you're recording it, then you can have reference back to that again. I misspelled, by the way, harmony. And I noticed that in regards to part of my notes. That was under the principles necessary for the kingdom of heaven on earth. And that was item number 5, the harmony of science and religion.
Hello.
Everybody there?
Yes, we have Mr. Daryush. I think he wants to ask a question.
Please. Now remember, I'm not the sharpest tool in the box, so I may refer to somebody else to answer this.
No, I just wanted to make a comment about that proper compulsory education, which is the key really to most of all these things. Because what if the people are denied from proper education and denied to have access even to our Baha'i books, they burn them, they destroy them, and no media, that now we have tons of them, none of them talk about the Baha'i faith. How on earth people are going to know about these wonderful teachings of Baha'u'lláh? Especially Baha'u'lláh indicates but proper education must be compulsory for all the children of the world. And
Yes.
if the parents cannot afford it, governments have to pay for it. Now we know there are millions of the children around the world. And in the news, I give you one example. American built lots of schools in Afghanistan for the education of girls. I don't know if you know what they did with them. Afghani people burned them all down, told the teachers if they attend to this school, they kill them. And one stupid character even threw acid on the face of the children of age of 5, 6, 7 that they were going to a school. They know those in authority in the book of certitude. At the end, Bahá'u'lláh keeps two groups of people, rulers and religious leaders, responsible for all the wars, divisions, conflicts, everything in the world, because they don't want to lose their power and the thing. So they create division, they create red and blue, and this, that, and so on, hate, all created by these two group of people because they want to keep the power and the money and all that. I just wanted to put that thing in there for the people. Thank you for wonderful things you are saying.
Thank you. I see a chat that asks the question about the discussion of for a small business and talking about the principles of divine economics. Regardless of the size of the business, I mean, this is my opinion, regardless of the size of the business, we're in a position in which we're dealing with human beings. And so we are instructed as Baha'is that we have to find a means of livelihood. We need to work. And it's our way of worshiping God if we take that attitude. Meaning that if we go to work knowing that we're there regardless of our occupation, assuming that it's legal and appropriate, that occupation is meant to be of service, whether it's sweeping the floors or the chief financial officer of a company. And so every aspect of our lives is spiritual, whether we recognize it or not, because we are spiritual beings. And there's all kinds of science that goes behind the concept of science being something more than just physical. The concept of time-space has been dealt with through quantum physics and et cetera, knowing that to have a physical world, there needs to be something that's not confined to the physical world. And we have that ability as human beings to interact with that spirit that's part of our nature. But we're also in that position where we are human beings. So if you want to build a small business, you surround yourself with really smart people, whether they're your employees or they're very smart people that are your CPA, for example, or your attorney. You need to have vendors that help you, have a supply chain that are important to your business in whatever fashion. And they all have to be what I would refer to as vetted, meaning that you've put them to the test, finding out whether or not that they're people that you really want to do business with. The example that to try and live a Baha'i life was given to us by Baha'u'lláh through Abdul-Baha. Abdul-Baha was the example for us to go about doing this. And he was very meticulous about relationships of how he treated others with great dignity and love, compassion. On the other side, he did not stand for injustices, and he stood for making sure that people were vetted appropriately in regards to how they entered into a transaction. So what if you're going to start a business, whether it's small or large, eventually you're going to have a product or service that's going to be needed, obviously. And you're going to begin every day as a Baha'i, you're going to begin every day asking for God's guidance. And I can tell you that each of us that have had long careers in life, no matter what we do, have made mistakes. And that's just part of who we are. And there are times in which there are inherent conflicts of interest in business, in relationships with people, in which, we can call it rounding the corners, in which, well, we're kind of ethical, but maybe not. Maybe we've left out certain levels of information. And as a Baha'i, we have to really fight in order to not be caught up into that rounding off the corner. We have to find our ways of providing leadership and standing up for the truth, standing up for the integrities. And it's very scary sometimes, it's very painful sometimes. And there's no possible way that you can go to business each day in dealing with human beings without some level of conflict of interest. That conflict comes between, I need to make some money today to pay my bills, but at whose expense and or whose benefit? So I don't know if that answers the question of the person that put that on chat or not.
Well, there is a question on Facebook chat, and this is for the Facebook stream that's streaming live on Facebook.
Oh, okay.
The question.
I thought my audience was just what was on the screen here.
No, it's also YouTube in addition.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, geez. You should have had somebody who really knows what they're talking about on this thing.
Well, I think that you might have experience with this one, and it is kind of a new wave as well with people trying to find alternatives. So this question says, from Terrence McBride, he's heard of worker co-ops as an alternative to corporations as they exist. And what is your position on worker co-ops?
Well, that's a broad discussion, but if I can assume a certain definition that this person has talked about, it's an environment in which I think at least it's an environment in which people are independent, and yet meaning that I do X as a business and I'm in an environment in which there's many others who have other types of services that they offer. And in order to save money on rent, et cetera, and it could be on Zoom, of course, but in order to associate with each other, provide references for each other, provide leads for each other in terms of new business, it makes a lot of sense. It's been going on for a long time, but not officially called a co-op in that fashion. But it's been, if you think about it, if I ask you for a referral to provide business, the first thing that's going to happen is that if I've said, would you introduce me, John, to James Jones? John, what you're going to do is in your mind, you're going to say, I wonder why Michael wants to meet James Jones. And do I trust James Jones because I trust the relationship with Michael? Or do I trust Michael enough to be able to introduce him to James Jones? So the concept of co-op is providing a place that hopefully is built around trust. Trust is a spiritual terminology, and yet we have it on our currency. In God we trust. So I don't know if that answers that, but the question of an organized co-op, an organized trust environment, is one in which it seems obvious. it's just a creative way of helping one another. But we all have a, in the old days, they called them a Rolodex. And we always had people that we could refer to as somebody that is that we would want to do business with or would refer people. But this concept of trust is absolutely necessary. If somebody says, I need a doctor, well, are you going to go to the Yellow Pages, or are you going to ask a friend that says, you had an issue with this and this is the doctor you use, tell me the outcome. So it makes good sense to have an environment in which people trust one another and they cooperate in terms of providing knowledge as well as referrals and relationships. You know, if you think about this, the average person knows 500 people. And if you're going to build a business, wouldn't it be nice to be able to know those 500 names of John? And then John has to weigh whether or not that there is a strong enough relationship between those two parties that you'd want to put them together. You say how simple that is of referring to the concept of trustworthiness? It's absolutely critical.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the moral of the story is the basis of any economy is founded upon trust.
Yes. Trust and honesty, they go hand in hand. They're the foundation. Abdu'l-Baha repeats that many times as well.
Yes, it's extremely interesting because as you just mentioned, the co-op process, as the world, there are bright spots, but as the world descends into chaos and people not trusting one another and not even have a common set of morals to abide by, to even have that trust in someone else's capabilities. How do you see the coming 50 years with regards to the direction that we're going? For example, you have, I think everyone here is aware of the people on social platforms such as Reddit who have banded together to engage in investments that are against the establishment.
Well, the concept of trying to be a short-term trader, a short-term investor versus a long-term investor, you're asking my philosophy, and I'll give you my philosophy. I believe in ownership, and I believe in ownership based upon the concept of a business that's honest and trustworthy, that has a product that evaluates its impact on not only humanity, but on the environment, et cetera. I've never been a speculator. I've always thought about investing in companies that I would be proud to say I'm part owner of. And the concept of wanting to create systems of day trading, to create systems of being able to take small amounts of money and invest it, you know, that's been around a long time. It's just that the technology has gotten better and the price has gone down, and some of the newer places that are providing the services of being able to take small amounts of money and buy shares is making it easier for people not having to pay the fee or a commission. So it's just that kind of stuff is going to continue. I can tell you that in my career of 36 years in the investment business, in general, I was pretty good at it. But I can tell you that the places where I went and bought a stock and things went really bad with that particular company, I can tell you that 98% of the time, it had to do with the fact that there was information that led to realizing that there was distrust. Okay, and it might have been another set of books. It might have been somebody leaving information out in a quarterly report or an annual report. But I can give you a lot of stories, and I don't know how much time we got to do this, but I can tell you that the times that I have found the leadership of a company being going against my principles as a Baha'i. If I didn't get out in time, I knew I was going to lose money. Okay, and there was a very, very, very famous retailer that eventually went bankrupt. And I was managing a very large office for, at the time, Prudential Securities. And I had a meeting in Florida that was a Baha'i meeting. And I went to that Baha'i meeting. And at that Baha'i meeting, there was a vice president of a division for this national retailer. And they had gone through a process of buying another company, and how that they were told to treat the owners of the new company that was purchased, because they were going to have to downsize because there was duplication of employment, and how they were treating those people, to me, went against the grain of what I felt and believed. And I felt that their application of it was dishonest. It was immoral. It wasn't just. I went back to my office and I investigated all of our holdings, meaning I went to every advisor that worked with me. And we had 30 at the time. I went to all 30 advisors and I said, okay, guys, tell me what, and ladies, what do you have on your books right now of this company? And they all looked at me and said, oh, well, here. Okay. I said, let me tell your experience, my experience. And I asked every person, how did you feel about that? And they said, I think I'm going to sell my stock. So they called all their clients that owned that stock, unless they had power of attorney, and they sold it. As it turns out, the company went downhill 6 months later. So all the numbers you see, and in terms of a quarterly report, they're old numbers. You know, they're after the fact. So you better be building your relationships of owning anything, any kind of business based upon honesty and trustworthiness. This is the foundation of all business. That's a long explanation, but sorry, there it is.
That's
I can give you a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, that's a very good explanation. So those watching can get a sense of. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I'm in the insurance business and investment business, similar to yours. And I deal with a little bit other end of it. I try to give life insurance to people who I feel need it, like that have families and have children and have this big mortgage and needs. And I have worked with them for maybe 30 years. I've done managed care with long-term care home, or managed care like a mutual fund, not mutual funds, but like Prudential, managed care like HMOs and PPOs. And they're free at the point where I'm at in Florida here. And I try to help people, and even the people who I try to help, even though they don't pay for this and they pick up their drugs and dental and vision, all this, I try as a Baha'i to help people just see the value in these things. But there's so much misgivings about it. I can't even give something away to them that's free, that they don't pay for, that could help them, that could actually do better for them. And it's such a barrier just to explain it, to get over that fact that I'm just trying to help them. And I had a question for you. How did you overcome someone just of that nature? You just move on or forget, or you go to a next prospect, or what? How would you deal with that? And from your experiences, see, my end is a little bit different. I like, there's no premium. You give it to them, and they don't accept it. Life insurance, I try to tell them, you have young kids and you have term. Maybe it's $200 a year for to pay the mortgage off, and they don't even want to accept that. How have you come across in your career that way to handle those people to make them see the light at the end of the tunnel? That was my question.
Well, this is not a short discussion because when you're training hundreds of people over a long career, how to enter the business of the world of finance and investing money, eventually you got to have clients. So whether it's investing or some other kind of business, eventually you have to go to finding out who do you know and who do they know. And otherwise it's all about marketing. And so, it comes down to everyone needs some level of life insurance in order to protect their income to protect their family, to provide things for their future. And not everybody needs more life insurance. Sometimes people have the wrong kind. So from an ethical standpoint, you just have to go through and do an evaluation. If you don't have enough clients and you're building this, it's interesting because a very well-known musician called me and said, hey, there's a guy that I know that's building brand new into the insurance business. And I said, okay. And he said, he's going to need a lot of guidance. Would you mind he call you? And I said, no, not at all. I trusted this very famous musician. And so as a result of that, this guy calls. And so I spent several hours with him going through this discussion. But ultimately, it goes back to what I asked John earlier about the whole concept of introduction. It's who do you trust? Do I trust the person to whom I'm those two people I'm bringing together? If I say to you, I need an introduction to so-and-so, you may say, why? And that's a legitimate question. But again, if I know 500 people and you know 500 people, somewhere along the line, they may need the services of one another. That's simple as that. And I understand the process. The training that I would offer anybody is that don't try to sell people something. You know, if I go to my doctor, I don't want him selling me something. I want him to analyze what my needs are. And then I want the surgeon, and I'm going to ask her to say, okay, what are my chances? So it's the educational process, and then let's make a decision. Hopefully it helps.
Okay, that helps a lot because everybody, like for instance, that's how I've been doing it, and I've been marketing myself through referrals mainly. And that's basically how I've dealt with people, by pointing out their needs and saying, hey, there's several ways to do this, and I can help you do that, but you got to be willing to agree to do it. Once you find a path, don't just look at it, do something. That's kind of where you got to do a little bit of the pushing or the arm bending, but it just ultimately it helps them. If they see the value, they do it. That's kind of how I thought. I was just checking that with you, and I appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
And this is definitely valuable for any of you who are watching, who are interested in learning that information. The first step is, as Mr. Hendon said, not to sell something. So
I mean, eventually you're going to sell something. I mean, because you got either a product or a service, but ultimately, do they need it? And if they don't, then you're not a carnival barker. You're out trying to do a professional job.
But you said it, they have to trust you. And first and foremost, you're starting a relationship. You're not starting a transaction, like you said.
Exactly right. And I can also tell you this. When I go back and review my life, there are some very painful experiences in which I know I lost the trust of somebody. And it boiled down to the conflict of interest. It boiled down to my not having enough information. And most of the time is I made a decision without an appropriate understanding of the needs of the client, or I made a decision based upon a misunderstanding of the product or the investment. And those are very, very, very painful. And so the due diligence that we have to do in regards to understanding the client's needs is absolutely critical. And it is, no matter what. I don't care if you're a school teacher and you've got 25 students, every one of them are unique and they have needs, and they have to be dealt with in some fashion in order to communicate with them. Or you could be a doctor, or you could be a lawyer, you could be a CPA, you could be, the CEO of companies. I look at this and say, we're in this world together as human beings, and we have to treat each other with the greatest level of dignity. Surround ourselves with honesty and trustworthiness, and make sure that we're in a position in which our environment of information is highly diversified. So there's a very, very well-known businesswoman who became well known as a Baha'i, and she was one of the top executives at a huge insurance company. And she went to that insurance company with the ability to really build into her environment Baha'i principles. And one of those things that she implemented that was adopted by the entire, and I'm talking about a massive insurance company. The whole company adopted this principle, and this was the principle of consultation. And she adopted it in her meetings. And it was one of the most fascinating things to watch and hear her tell about how it grew and the integrity of the business grew, the knowledge of the business grew, and ultimately the financial side of the business grew. Consultation is one of those things that I put on the list that is necessary for us to have the ability to grow from a divine standpoint. If we've got 9 people and we only listen to one, we've robbed ourselves of 8 other positions of knowledge and expertise.
That makes a lot of sense. So we have trust, of course, truthfulness, and we have consultation. So in essence, all of these things seem like recipes for unity.
Yes, absolutely. Inclusiveness and unity. So you got to give a voice to be included. And back in the late 70s, early 80s, when we became much more oriented towards Japan in terms of a relationship with doing business. One of the things that they taught the United States in terms of major corporations was they listened to the line workers in auto manufacturing, for example. And they listened to the people that were designing the cars, but they also listened to the people manufacturing them and talking about how to improve manufacturing and how to improve quality. And it seemed like a huge revelation for those of us in the United States when we started watching books being written and whole consultations and whole businesses built around bringing, the information from Japan. Well, that was billions and billions and billions of dollars that were improved both in terms of revenue coming in, but in terms of cost savings because of quality control, et cetera. Friends, if we want to learn something, we got to learn from people who know something. And that comes from books, it comes from classrooms, it comes from Zoom meetings as we know them, but it also comes from consultation. And that starts in a family structure. And from a Baha'i perspective, it starts in Baha'i communities. For those of you that are Baha'is, you know that one of the things that's being done is tens of thousands of neighborhoods throughout the world. I think something like 80,000 was the last thing that I saw. 80,000 neighborhood consultations going on and helping children and junior youth and youth begin to understand the concepts of who we are as human beings. Not trying to proselytize the Baha'i faith, because we're not allowed to do that, but to build unity and an understanding between ourselves for the growth of humanity, for the growth of the needs of that neighborhood. We have a friend in Florida that began doing that in a neighborhood, and now she's got this brilliant private school that, it's not a religious school, so therefore the parents don't have to pay for it. It's public education, but it's built around values that came from a neighborhood association. And it's just remarkable to look throughout where there is growth and understanding in the world today. It's coming from building relationships in these neighborhood opportunities. I know that there's probably a statistic that people quote 6 to 7 million people are Baha'is, but there's another 3 to 4 million people that are working shoulder to shoulder with Baha'is in these neighborhood associations, and that, you know, they may not identify themselves in terms of a particular religion, but if they were asked, and this was backed up by the divinity school at Harvard, is that when people were asked, to what religion do you relate the most if you have a religion? And they said, well, I'm not a religious person, but if I identified myself, it would probably be a Baha'i. Well, that number, instead of 6 or 7 million, was 10 million. That's according to Divinity School of the School of Divinity at Harvard University. We all have work to do. It comes in how we treat one another. It comes in our trust. It comes in our integrity. It comes in gathering information enough to make good business decisions. And every decision that a family makes has got some level of business to it. Where do we buy our groceries? I don't know if that helps. Hello.
Alaba, how are you?
Well, Alaba.
I just want to say thank you for the beautiful subject you discussed. It's very important for all the Baha'is to hear about that. And also, it was beautiful what you mentioned. Is also in Baha'i economy to be good starts in family, like you mentioned. And also, one big thing is saving, not wasting. And that's something one of in Kitab al-Aqdas mentions, that we need to save. If it's whatever is necessary for us to keep is good to use. But if it is not necessary, we don't need to acquire that. We have to think about raising our conscience about other people, like you mentioned.
Yes.
And in economy, as you mentioned again, is that it has to be justice, trustworthiness, and trust. And also, one more key subject onto that is knowledge and fact.
Yes.
If someone goes in there, if I tell my clients or someone talks to us and tell them what their needs are, but if it doesn't correspond, or if that person does not provide the actual fact to the individual, and the individual finds from another person, say, oh, this is what it is. And they go in computers now these days. So whatever we talk about, it has to be fact. So when they go on the computer, they find something, another answer. So that's part of the trust. That's how people don't use some people, because they don't feel comfortable. They don't feel that, because people investigate now.
Simone, the concept of information, or the concept of knowledge, and the concept of truth, we're told in the Baha'i scripture that it's relative.
Mm-hmm.
So truth is a relative thing, meaning that I may think I know, but that's me, whereas other people may think differently in terms of looking at the same information. That's called a point of view, POV. So if we're all sitting in a room, we all have a different perspective just from our eyesight. So that's what consultation is about, is giving the opportunity for us to share our perspective, to share our viewpoints. And going back to Darush's discussion about the inclusion of women in the Baha'i faith, if you're a parent and you can only afford to educate one of your children, one is male and one is female, we're told it must be the female. And that's you know, that's very clear in the Baha'i writings, that if that's all you can afford is one of the two, and one is a girl and one is a boy, it's got to be the girl. And that's
absolutely.
And she's the first educator of humanity. So for those of us that have been a Baha'i a long time, and we start thinking, well, I wonder how much I've not read. And I went through that process, and I've got a huge library, and it's in multiple rooms. And right now I'm sitting in my own office. So, but the concept of scripture the concept of information about the Baha'i faith coming directly from the Bab, Bahá'u'lláh, Abdu'l-Baha, and Shoghi Effendi. I know maybe I don't know any, but there's probably some people who have read every single word that was written, but I haven't. And I've been a Baha'i for 51 years, and I read every day, both morning and evening. That's how voluminous this information for the world civilization that we're trying to build is. In addition to which, it's built into it an administrative process that has justice built into it. You know, as a human being, I think I try to be just, but I'm a human being. So justice ultimately has to come from a collection or an institution. And Baha'u'lláh did that. He built the Universal House of Justice and the framework for justice, so that it's an institution providing that, not just how did you do with the laws. It's a provision of justice, you know, because human beings want to see justice, but sometimes it's revenge. So, you know, the ingredients for the framework for the institution of humanity to dwell on this planet and serve the planet and serve the people and serve and protect it is built. And it began in 1844 for those of us that believe it. For those of us that haven't adopted it yet, you're still being affected by the influence of what Baha'is and what Baha'i scripture has introduced to humanity. It hasn't eliminated all the problems. We're going to face problems, but ultimately with appropriate understanding with one another and appropriate consultation, you know, we begin affecting one another around the world. I have some friends that work at the Carter Center, and I don't know if any of you have ever been to the Carter Center in Atlanta. I was just looking at this pin that's on my lapel. I was invited to go there. And President Carter has created an environment of service around the world greater than I think perhaps any other human being that I've ever studied or read or met. And it's you talk about education. I went to a forum in which there were people from 80 countries around the world that came to Atlanta, Georgia to sit in on this stuff. And two of the people that are there are Baha'is, and they've introduced a lot of Baha'i concepts in terms of how to run meetings. And it's really a remarkable thing to hear a tribal chief from Africa talk about the necessity in a Muslim environment, the necessity of educating the girls in their tribes. And so they've broken all of that tradition that was there. And that influence is starting to spread throughout the world in terms of service to humanity. It's really remarkable.
Mr. Hampton, Mr. President Carter, he came to my school at USF, and I gave him the Bahá'u'lláh New Era. And another time, incidents, I met with him, and I gave him some answer question of Abdu'l-Baha. So he is very, very nice man.
Yes, yeah.
Very nice man.
Two of the people that work very, very, very close with him on a daily basis when he's at the Carter Center are Baha'is.
Yes. Beautiful.
So that, in other words, in our daily lives, the work that we bring to the service of other people, influenced by the holy scriptures from Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Baha and the Bab and Shoghi Effendi, guess what? That's our job. We're there to be of service to humanity and provide that extra ingredient that is guided through us when our hearts are truly centered in service to humanity as a Baha'i. But you know what? I believe that's possible with Christians as well, and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims, but they don't have direct guidance unless they studied Baha'i scripture, because it's the latest information. And I don't mean that to be religiously biased. I mean that's based upon my experience as an older man and having tried to get through life. And it's been wonderful having libraries of references as to what do I do under these circumstances. So I don't know how much, are we running out of time or are we good?
Yes, we've run out of time.
Way
But
over.
it was very valuable that you brought up that point of justice as a fundamental for economics, because you know better than most that you have the Uniform Commercial Code, you have these international standards, you have world institutions. Even if we don't have militaries and governments that are truly global, you still have a globally functioning economic system to an
Yes.
extent.
Yes, absolutely.
And the one place that they know that we need justice, it's in the business sector. It's when you are dealing across borders and you want to have that trust, like you're mentioning, and most importantly, established by that justice if something were to be unfair. Now, there can be a lot of criticisms, but it's intriguing where in America, at least, where a lot of the states in this country, they want to be having their own personal laws. And of course, you have the federal government, but you have a uniform commercial code that each state on its own individually ratified so that there could be a uniform commercial system across the United States. And likewise, European Union, the delivery of coal and such, the Social and Economic Development Conference in Orlando, Florida, multiple people have spoken. One of them was dealing with the international courts and specifically how the delivery of coal was effectively part of the world wars. One of the reasons the world wars were so hot and contested was because of coal in the Rhine River Valley between France and Germany. So there's a lot of these points where trust is so valuable, honesty is so valuable, and our takeaway, lastly, justice and consultation. Those four elements, correct? What am I missing? Another one from?
Well, it's
Purity.
trustworthy.
Sorry,
Yeah,
but that's purity and good intention, John.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
Purity
can't
and
forget
good
that.
intention for your other people,
yeah.
not
Yes.
yourself.
Well, when it comes to governance, people say, well, what is the Baha'i influence on governance? Well, the Charter for the United Nations, the Constitution for the United Nations was taken from Baha'i scriptures and influenced by Baha'i scriptures. That's historical. We know, I can tell you lots of stories from Baha'is who knew prime ministers and influenced people in India and Egypt, etc. Gandhi was very close friends with Baha'is, and when he was asked questions by reporters, sometimes he would turn to those people when they were in their presence and said, "You should be asking the Baha'is how to answer that question." There is a person that many of you know, and Bill Davis is a name. Hopefully, Bill won't mind me using his name. He was a former member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is in the United States. He was just part of the administrative system. And he was in charge of the court systems in California. And he helped write the constitutions for several countries. And one of the things he was insistent upon when he was hired to do so is that women would be included in rights in those constitutions, for example. Another one in terms of influence is that the countries of Africa have all gone with fiber optics in terms of communication systems throughout their countries. The person that spearheaded that was one of the owners of the company that did it, was a Baha'i, very well-known person. I'm not going to mention his name, but one of the things that he ran into was the concept of graft or bribery that was prevalent in almost all of the countries. And he just laid the law down and said, if you want to be part of something that's going to be of service to your country in terms of fiber optics, and they were responsible for the installation of the fiber optics through these countries. So, he had to fight those kinds of moral battles between people who wanted to be bribed, to be paid bribery, and not. Well, we know at the time of the Bab and Bahá'u'lláh, the country of Iran was that its whole structure was built around graph around payments, around being paid, for positioning and referrals and influence. We just talked about that in terms of referrals. If I was going to give a referral to a human being, I certainly wouldn't be taking a graph. That's just not ethical. So it's one of those things in which is sometimes really big steps and sometimes very small steps, but they all have an importance in terms of building our relationship. Okay, I've been long-winded. You've been very, we got started because of my inability to get online for whatever reason. And Jeremiah, I don't know if you're on or not, but thank you so much for helping me, and Jean, and all of you that have participated. I'll close when you say it's time to close, but I know I've gone past.
We are actually at that point, and it is time to close. And we appreciate you for coming out and, of course, being patient with the process as we set up the Zoom today. So thank you so much for making yourself available and being patient. And this includes everyone here that's on the Zoom as well.
Thank you, friends. Alawapa. Alawapa. God, that means God is most glorious.